In the city of Fujite, situated in the southern territory of the Olzano Empire, there's a magical academy. A pupil of the magical academy named Rumia meets with her companion Sistine and begins heading to the academy. The greatest sorcerers and enchanters of the Olzano Empire have graduated from this notorious academy, so it's a dream for anyone to enter here. Sistine discloses that she is an aristocrat, unlike Rumia, who is merely a commoner, but they still regard each other as family. On their way, the two girls nearly collide with a sprinting boy named Glenn. But at the last moment, Sistine uses her wind sorcery to blast him away. Glenn plunges into a fountain, but still behaves gallantly toward the girls to impress them, even though he was the one who lunged into them like a lunatic. He tells the girls to walk cautiously in traffic next time. Glenn believes that he is not responsible and begins accusing both of them. He then looks at the two girls for the first time, and for no reason begins to do a full body examination of Rumia. He inquires if they have encountered each other before, but before he can get his response, Sistine once again blasts him away with her sorcery for touching Rumia without any consent and walks off. The two girls then enter their classroom and discover that their new temporary teacher has not yet arrived. All of the students become anxious, as no instructor has ever been tardy before, and start to protest. Glenn enters the classroom and announces that he is the temporary teacher. Sistine becomes stunned upon seeing him, but Glenn completely rejects everything that occurred in their earlier meeting. He attempts to deliver his introduction, but Sistine tells him to move past it and begin the class already. Meanwhile, a lecturer named Hallie presents the very unimpressive resume of Glenn to the headmaster and complains about assigning a subpar mage like him the role of a substitute teacher. Hallie doubts whether Glenn is even qualified to instruct their school's gifted students and thinks that he will merely loaf around. Glenn validates him as he tells the students to study on their own for today's session and then goes to take a nap. The headmaster, Rick, reads Glenn's resume and realizes that he doesn't even possess a teaching permit. What? But he still has faith in Glenn, as he was recommended by another professor named Celica. Professor Celica arrives there and cautions Hallie to stop criticizing Glenn, and promises Rick that she will take full accountability for Glenn if he fails. Glenn gets compelled by Sistine to educate them at least a little, so he scribbles some runic incantations on the board with no effort at all. His instructional method is so dull and lifeless that the students lose motivation. Still, a girl named Lynn asks him to clarify what he wrote on the board, which appears to be in a foreign tongue. But Glenn is so indolent that he tells the students to decipher it themselves by using a lexicon. Sistine becomes furious, as that's not how a teacher should talk. But before she can compel him to instruct them again, the bell rings and Glenn gleefully exits the class. At the girls' restroom, Sistine and Rumia change their attire and do suspicious activities in front of the other girls when Glenn suddenly bursts in there unintentionally and gets assaulted by the girls for it. Later, in the cafeteria, Sistine looks over at the floating sky citadel called Melgalius and yearns to uncover its enigmas. Glenn chooses to take a seat with them, begins to consume his meal, and offers some of it to Rumia. Sistine still remains furious at Glenn and gets prepared to tell him how terrible of an instructor he is, but before Glenn gets disgraced by Sistine in front of everyone, he intentionally pushes some beans into her mouth so that she can't utter a word, which irritates her even more. Celica glances up at the sky and recollects when she first proposed Glenn to be the provisional teacher at the Magic Academy. He initially refused it because he believed that he was not competent for it, but Celica intimidated him so much that he was compelled to join as an educator. Glenn begins his second lecture of today and again tells the students to learn on their own. He repeats the same instruction at the third lecture as well, so Sistine threatens to proceed with getting him dismissed using her aristocratic father's authority, but Glenn feels more than delighted that he will finally be dismissed and won't have to exert any effort anymore. That pushes Sistine's patience, and she dares Glenn to a magical duel. She tells him that if he fails this duel, he has to amend his poor conduct that he has displayed and teach class diligently from now on. Witnessing her dedication towards her education reminds Glenn of someone, so he finally becomes earnest and accepts her challenge. So they head to the school grounds for their battle alongside all the other pupils in the class. Glenn decides to give her an advantage by using only one incantation named Shock Bolt, since he thinks highly of himself. The brightest pupil in the class explains that Shock Bolt is a protective spell used to immobilize adversaries and thinks that Glenn will triumph if he casts his spell quicker than her. Their duel starts shortly after as she summons a spell called Thunder Sprites, and Glenn takes it directly and instantly loses the duel. He requests a 3-round duel but gets bested every time. As Sistine has won this duel, Glenn now has to accept her conditions and become a reliable teacher. Glenn behaves as if nothing occurred even after losing the duel and acts unmotivated in the next lecture as well. Lynn reluctantly asks him about something that she didn't comprehend about runic magic again, but Sistine tells her that she is just wasting her time on that worthless mage. She tells Lynn that Glenn doesn't understand the greatness or importance of magic, so Glenn gets insulted and tells her that there's nothing magnificent about magic. He believes that magic is only effective for eliminating people and that it is 10 times mightier than sword techniques. He begins to ramble on about how much of a good-for-nothing is magic, which disheartens everyone in class. Sistine can't bear it any longer and slaps him for having an opinion, then dashes out of the class. Later, Glenn realizes that he was being disrespectful towards Sistine and chooses to resign this position before harming someone, but then he suddenly only notices Rumia sketching a magic circle in the distance, so he instantly heads there to assist her construct it properly. He adds Mercury to Rumia's magic circle and tells her to give it a try now, so she recites the spell and the magic circle begins shining. Seeing her astonishment, Glenn recollects when he was once an inspired child like her. Afterward, Rumia realizes that Glenn genuinely admires magic after seeing him so devoted to assisting her earlier and asks him what he was doing before he became an instructor here. Glenn bluntly tells her that he was lodging in Professor Salika's house, but doesn't want to go into any further specifics. He then asks Rumia why all the students become so frantic when it comes to magic. Rumia explains that she wants to comprehend magic more to repay her obligations to someone. Apparently she was abducted by wicked mages and nearly slain 3 years ago, but the Mage of Justice rescued her life, so she realized that she desired to safeguard humanity as well by studying magic further, and she hopes that maybe she will be able to thank the Mage of Justice one day. Glenn again takes a closer glance at her, but then silently strolls away. At Sistine's residence, she remembers when her grandfather told her about his final wish, which was to step into Melgalius's levitating sky citadel. She, as a child, vowed to become a greater mage than him so that she could unveil the mysteries of Melgalius for him. The next day, Glenn bends down and apologizes to everyone in class for his conduct. He begins the class by informing all of the students that they don't know anything about magic. For today's lesson, Glenn decides to instruct everyone in the exact incantation that was used on him by Sistine in their duel, Shock Bolt, but the students have already perfected that spell and claim to be superior at it than Glenn. Glenn tells them that they truly understand nothing about Shock Bolt and demonstrates that chanting differently will alter the spell's outcome. He reveals to the students that he actually possesses a broader understanding of magic than anyone else in the room and explains magic's genuine meaning. According to him, magic is about seizing the hearts of mankind, so he illustrates by proposing to Sistine, which causes her to blush, and provides an example of her, saying that affecting the world using words is the core of magic. To verify that, he invents a chant of his own and uses it to cast a spell. So he tells them that even they can adjust a chant if they know the essentials and don't require any books to help them advance. After making them grasp what magic is, he begins to teach them the principles of magic. He captures the full focus of the class with his remarkable lecture and concludes the day with triumph. This time, Glenn genuinely feels positive about being an instructor. Celica comes to him to praise him, as she has grown to be proud of him. She tells him that now that he is finally committed to teaching correctly, she will be departing with all the other instructors to a magic conference the next day. Later, Sistine and Rumia realize that Glenn is actually a superb magic educator, but Sistine still regards him as a lowlife. Rumia suddenly remembers that she didn't get along with Sistine at first, but now that they are closest friends, she believes that Sistine and Glenn will get along too. On the opposite side, two malicious mages discuss their sinister scheme, and one of them claims that a man named Glenn can be a hindrance to them, but their boss tells them he cannot do anything to them and commands them to continue as planned. The next day, Glenn awakens late and dashes straight toward the Magic Academy again, but then he detects a sinister presence trailing him, so the wicked mage exposes himself and employs his corruption magic to eliminate Glenn. At Sistine's class, the two dark mages from earlier named Bob and Rob arrive there saying they are Glenn's replacements, but Sistine knows that they don't have any justification to be there, so she decides to contact security, but Bob threatens to eliminate her with his military grade magic before she can call security and tells everyone to comply fly if they wish to survive. The two mages then disclose that they are searching for a girl named Rumia. Bob proceeds to harm Sistine to extract information from her, so Rumia surrenders, hoping that Glenn will come rescue her. But Rob tells them that their instructor is already deceased. Rob then takes Rumia away and unveils that Rumia is actually a princess, while Bob escorts Sistine to an isolated room to exploit her. But before he can force himself on her, Glenn arrives to save the moment. Bob uses his magic on Glenn, but his spells are nullified as Glenn reveals that he possesses an original incantation called the Fool's World that can suppress all magic within a specific radius. But that implies that he can't also wield his magic. How exactly is a mage supposed to battle if he disables his own magic? He strikes Bob and knocks him unconscious with his military-level hand-to-hand skills. After subduing Bob, Glenn makes sure Sistine is unharmed. He learns from Sistine that the other mage, Rob, abducted Rumia, so he wonders why she was targeted, since he has captured the mage named Carol who was trailing him earlier. He considers extracting information from him. Celica contacts Glenn and learns from him that a covert organization of wicked mages called Research of the Divine Wisdom has seized the entire Magic Academy. Glenn speculates that they have a spy inside the Magic Academy, as no intruders would have been able to penetrate its protection that easily. So he asks Celica to investigate to uncover who the traitor is, and tells her to request the Court Mage Corporation for reinforcement. But Celica clarifies that she lacks the authority to initiate any measures, so Glenn becomes despondent. Sistine realizes that Glenn was correct when he said that magic is good for nothing. It's because of it her friend was kidnapped. Glenn comforts her by saying that he will personally handle the situation and eliminate the other evil mages. Suddenly, bone golems emerge out of a magic circle. But since Glenn's magic nullification spell is active, he can't activate his magic, so they start running away. The two work together to make Sistine summon a great spell to keep the bone golems from coming any closer, so Glenn uses a high-level spell called Extinction Ray to completely defeat them, but then he falls to the ground. So Sistine realizes that he has a mana deficiency, which makes it hard for him to use high-level spells. Their way is blocked again by another evil mage named Rake, who has already summoned golden swords. Glenn realizes that there is no way out of this, so he pushes Sistine off the edge to fight alone against Rake, but he knows that he cannot use his magic nullification spell Fool's World anymore. His Rake already has a spell active, so he uses his fist to stop the magic swords from coming at him. Glenn looks for a way to land a hit on Rake, but to no avail, so Glenn comes up with a plan and gets stabbed by all of Rake's swords deliberately to give Sistine the opening to dispel the sword's magic. Glenn then uses one of the swords to kill the mage. Sistine reveals that when Glenn pushed her off the edge, she landed safely on the bushes and then climbed back up, saving Glenn's life. They start heading back to take down the others, but Glenn falls to the ground because of too much blood loss. Sistine tries using a healing spell on him, but it fails. Glenn realizes that he is about to die and remembers that he always wanted to be a mage of justice. He finds himself waking up to Celica's call and seeing that Sistine has become unconscious while using her healing spell. Glenn learns from Celica that the evil mages cannot get out of the school anymore, so Glenn figures out that the mages are actually trying to rewrite the destination of a teleportation circle to make their escape. He immediately starts heading to the tall tower where the teleportation circle is in, finds Rumia with a professor named Huey. Huey reveals himself to be the mole, and tells Glenn he intends to sacrifice himself to teleport Rumia back to his organization and also blow up the entire academy. But Huey explains that Glenn can still save the day if he counters the teleportation circle binding Rumia. Glenn understands and uses his blood as a catalyst to rewrite the teleportation circle's binding, but that was the first layer of the 5 circles that he needs to unbind. He goes on to undo all of them while losing his blood, and he tells Rumia that he has always wanted to be the mage of justice. He reaches the last layer but begins to cough up blood as he starts running out of mana. Rumia, with her strong will to help Glenn, reaches out her hand to get outside the barrier and completely heals Glenn with her divine magic, even amplifying his powers. Glenn wakes up realizing that she is special, and with her help, Glenn finally rewrites the teleportation circle and undoes the spell. Huey admits defeat as he takes Glenn's punch. Later, Glenn learns from Celica that Rumia is actually the princess. She had a special ability that is forbidden for royal blood and would eventually get prosecuted for it. That's the reason she faked her death 3 years ago and became a commoner. Glenn understands it and doesn't care much about it, even when it's it's a big secret. He decides to keep teaching and stay at the Magic Academy as he wishes to see his students' bright futures ahead. The Queen Alicia learns that her presumed deceased daughter, Princess Hermione, now identified as Rumia, is at the center of the incident at the Olzano Magic Academy, so she decides to travel to Olzano with High Commander Zelos to see Rumia. Alicia assumes that Rumia must resent her for what she did to her 3 years ago, but Rumia is far past that as she now has a fresh life with her companion Sistine. There's an interschool competition the following week, but no one wants to enroll, so Glenn shows up to inspire his students. He uses his sound judgment to choose the most capable students for each category based on their abilities and pledges them that he will help them win the tournament. It shows how well he has observed his students, and that makes Sistine feel pleased to see her awkward teacher finally becoming accountable. Glenn sees a memory of him going to the headmaster's office and asking the headmaster Rick to provide his pay in advance because he is penniless. But giving pay early is against the rules of the academy, so the headmaster tells him about a special reward that a teacher will get if their class wins the tournament next week. And that explains why Glenn is in it so earnestly. After setting up the teams, Glenn learns from the class scholar Jibble that they could just make only the top students engage in the rounds, even repeatedly, and that all the other classes are applying the same method too. Nice, but Sistine declares that she wants everyone in the class to join, so Glenn gets compelled to use his previously arranged team. He later sees Class 1 and his own Class 2 disputing over who will get the field to train for the upcoming contest. So Glenn comes to stop the clash and sees that Halle, the person who loathes him the most, is the class instructor of Class 1. Halle tries to provoke and ridicule Glenn and his class, and triumphs so much that Glenn wagers his 3-month salary on his team winning the upcoming tournament. Glenn instantly realizes that he has made a blunder, but it is too late to retreat. Sistine comes with her sharp wit and uses the school laws against Halle's class to make them leave the field, and soon Glenn's team begins to train with full dedication. The night before the contest, Rumia remembers being saved by the enigmatic Mage of Justice after being forsaken, so she keeps her hopes strong of encountering him again. She knows that her real mother, the Queen, will be arriving tomorrow, so she tells Sistine that no matter what happens, she will think of Sistine's parents as her own. They then come to dine with Sistine and her family, and it shows how joyful a family they are together. The next day, Queen Alicia arrives at Olzano and gets treated as the honored guest of the Magic Tournament. She declares the beginning of the competition, and with that, the rounds commence. Glenn's class excels as well initially, so Glenn takes credit for all of it, but then Holly comes to tease him again and sparks an argument. Salika sits beside Queen Alicia and discloses that they are both longtime companions. Alicia seems to recognize Glenn as well and hopes to see more from him. The round progresses, and with Class 2 excelling in most of the events, they reach rank 3. For the next round, it's mental defense, and Rumia takes part in it from Class 2. Just like the name suggests, it's an exam to assess their mental resilience. The evaluator uses his illusions one by one to eliminate the challengers, but Rumia and Class 5's Jalal remain firm. So the assessor then casts one of his more potent spells, which nearly makes Rumia tremble. Rumia keeps pushing on for her companions and kin, but she can only bear so much and collapses to the floor. But the examiner observes that her rival has been rendered unconscious even while he's upright, so he declares Rumia as the champion. The unexpected twist of fate causes Class 2 to leap to second place as Glenn exhales in relief. Two of his former comrades, Albert and Requisel, who are on a covert operation here, notice him after a long while. Requisel tries to contact Glenn, but Albert restrains him as their main mission is to monitor the Imperial Guards tasked with safeguarding the Queen. Albert reveals that they have received whispers of dubious conduct within the Imperial Guard and that they might attempt something against the Queen. Still, Requisel desires to resolve their dispute with Glenn. At lunch break, Lynn approaches Glenn and tells him that she wishes to trade with someone else for the upcoming event, which is the transmutation duel. Even though she adores transmutation matches, she isn't self-assured in her skills, so Glenn opts to encourage her by casting his own enchantment and morphing into Rumia. With this, Lynn finds the drive she needs to compete in the contest. Sistine gets deceived into assuming that Glenn is Rumia and hands him the sandwiches she made. She searches for Glenn but doesn't locate him anywhere, so she becomes irritated once again. The real Rumia arrives there, and Sistine realizes that the individual in front of her is Glenn, so she gets furious once more and blasts him away with her air magic. Rumia promptly dashes to Glenn's spot holding the sandwiches that Sistine prepared and hands them to him. She attempts to inform him that Sistine crafted those sandwiches for him, but the dense fool doesn't grasp it. The Queen Alicia finds her path there and asks Glenn for his presence. Meanwhile, the Imperial Guards become alarmed, seeing Her Majesty vanish abruptly, and Celica chuckles as she was the one who masked Alicia's location so that she could visit Glenn. Eleanor comes to Celica and murmurs something startling to her. Queen Alicia says sorry to Glenn for not being able to back him when he was dismissed from the Court Mage Corps a year ago, even though he dedicated his life to the kingdom. Glenn asks that she lift her head as he claims to have resigned by his own choice. But that shouldn't be why Alicia is here, so Glenn inquires about her motive. Queen Alicia clarifies that she only wants to make amends with Rumia, but Rumia rejects anything tied to being her lost daughter or even recognizing the queen and insists that she is merely a civilian named Rumia. Alicia understands that Rumia has moved on and no longer sees her as her mother. She respects her verdict and lets her leave. Then Alicia goes to head back to the stadium, but her route gets obstructed by her own Imperial Guards, led by Commander Zalos. Albert sees that the Imperial Guards are finally opposing the queen, so Requisel suggests just slaying them all at once. The tournament proceeds, and Class 2 keeps doing great. Sistine tells Glenn that Rumia hasn't returned yet, so Glenn informs her about what occurred earlier with the queen. Glenn adds that Rumia also brought the meal that Sistine prepared and tells her that he enjoyed her sandwiches. Hearing that, Sistine turns red with embarrassment, so she changes the subject and urges him to go find Rumia right away. Glenn locates Rumia sitting quietly near a tree examining a pendant. She tells Glenn that she senses there was something valuable inside that pendant, but she doesn't recall it anymore. Because Glenn now knows Rumia is the princess, she tells him why she was forsaken to start with. Apparently, Rumia is viewed as a demon, a forbidden existence because she was born with a unique gift, so she was deemed a danger and was discarded to secure the nation's future, and that's why she can never pardon her mother Alicia. She confesses that she still longs to call Alicia her mother, but she is now the child of Sistine's guardians, so there's a dilemma. Glenn comprehends what Rumia is enduring and tells her that he has walked a similar road where he has regretted many things himself, so he advises her to choose the path that will bring her the least sorrow by heeding her genuine emotions. He discloses to her that he was once a magician working in the Imperial Army. Due to the essence of his duty, which was capturing and eliminating corrupt mages, he had to visit the court frequently. During those periods, he saw the queen wearing the exact same pendant as Rumia's. Glenn thinks that the queen only wore that pendant because she cherished Rumia, so he encourages Rumia to follow her real emotions again and face the queen rather than fleeing endlessly. She realizes what she must do and asks Glenn to help her. Glenn cheerfully agrees, but the Imperial Guards hinder their way. They draw their blades, informing Rumia that she is accused of scheming to murder the queen, so Rumia is to be executed for betrayal and defaming royalty. The Imperial Guards announce that this is the queen's direct command, which leaves Rumia gravely wounded. She surrenders to the Imperial Guards, accepting her death, so the guards knock out Glenn and take Rumia away to execute her. In her dying moments, she remembers only her happy memories with her friends and family, but Glenn comes out of nowhere, blinding the Imperial Guards with his blinding light spell and knocking all of them unconscious. He then assumes the queen must be in danger, as she would never order her child's execution. War guards come their way, and Glenn escapes with Rumia. He looks for a way to find the queen and asks Celica if she is with her. Celica explains that she cannot do anything as she is taken hostage, and tells Glenn that he is the only one who can find a way to save both the queen and Rumia. She gives him a riddle by saying, "Can't do anything and only you," before ending the call. Glenn wonders how he will ever rescue the queen when she is heavily guarded by the Imperial Guards. He notices his two associates standing in the distance when Requisel attacks him with his great sword and causes a big explosion. We finally get the big reveal of what Eleanor whispered to Celica. She tells her that she had enchanted and placed the conditional death curse necklace around the queen's neck. She reveals that she is a member of the Researchers of Divine Wisdom organization and will use the queen for their noble mission. She then confidently tells Celica the only way to undo the death curse, thinking that she will never be able to accomplish it. According to Eleanor, the only way to save the queen is by paying a blood ransom by Sun. Back in the present, Requisel attacks Glenn with his military-grade magic and then summons a battle axe using alchemy. Glenn reveals that Requisel and Albert were his old associates of the court mages and thinks that these two are after him too, so he chants an ice spell, but Requisel dodges it and comes straight towards Glenn, while Albert prepares for long-range sniping magic. Glenn realizes realizes that he can't dodge and loses hope, but Albert's magic actually hits Riem, saving Glenn's life. Glenn tells Rumia that these two are his comrades from his old Imperial Army days. They serve in the Imperial Court Mage Corps Special Forces. Albert there is the Executioner number 17, the Star, and Requisel is number 7, the Chariot. Even though Glenn trusts the two, he still tells Rumia to be wary of them. Albert tells Glenn about the Imperial Guards holding Celica and the Queen hostage and assumes that they want to eliminate Rumia. Glenn doesn't understand why they are going after Rumia. They know that they can't think their way through this and must act quickly. So Requisel comes up with another straightforward, no bullshit strategy plan to attack the enemy from the front. But that's just way too dumb. Glenn doesn't understand why Celica can't do anything since she was Executioner number 21 when she was in the Special Forces. Even now, she is the best mage on the continent, so there must be something unusual going on. Meanwhile, Class 2 begins to lose their grasp of the competition as their mentor is gone, so Albert and Requisel come to the students and tell them that Glenn is out because something urgent came up. So Albert takes command of the class's Glenn substitute. Requisel assures Sistine that they can trust them, so she lets them be their temporary commander. The competition is in its final stages, and Class 2 must make a big comeback if they want to win. Hallie thinks that the victory will surely come to his class as Glenn is missing, and tells his student to crush Class 2 in the next transformation round. Hallie's student transforms into a ferocious dragon and impresses the judges. Lynn wonders how she will be able to top that, so Albert tells her to just enjoy herself out there, so she regains her confidence, transforms into an angel, and gets the perfect score. With Albert and Requisel's help, Class 2 again climbs up the leaderboard. For the elemental round, the Klassner Gibbon wins it, so it's now up to Sistine to win or lose it all, as it's the last round. Sistine knows that everyone is counting on her, so she must overcome her opponent, which she does with style. Class 2 becomes victorious and wins the competition. We see a glimpse of Glenn running away from the Imperial Guards while carrying Rumia, but ultimately he gets surrounded. It's almost about the time of sunset, and it's time for Her Majesty to present Class 2 with the winning medal. But instead of the students, Albert and Requisel come up on stage and reveal that they were Rumia and Glenn all along using transformation magic. Zelos wonders how they are here since they were supposed to be being chased by the Imperial Guards, so Glenn explains that he changed places with Albert and Requisel using the same magic. Zelos tries to attack Glenn, but Celica uses an isolation barrier to keep the guards outside the barrier. Zelos tells Glenn that he must kill Rumia, but can't explain why. He explains that the Queen must be protected at all costs and needs to make a sacrifice to preserve her life. He then asks the Queen what her decision is going to be, so the Queen ruthlessly orders Zelos to kill Rumia, as she cannot allow her to exist, and says that she regrets giving birth to her. Glenn knows that this is all a lie, but Rumia believes it. Celica doesn't say anything either, so Glenn tries to figure out what is going on and realizes that both Celica and the Queen are bound to be silent because of the necklace that the Queen is wearing. He charges towards the Queen after telling Rumia that her mother loves her more than everything and gets attacked by Zelos in the middle of the way. In that moment, the Queen successfully removes the necklace and its cursed effects. Glenn explains that the necklace had a conditional curse placed on it and had specific rules. If the wearer removes it, they die. If the time limit passes, they die. If anyone explains how to undo the curse, they die. And the only way to undo it is by killing Rumia. But since Rumia is alive, Zelos asks why the curse didn't activate. So Glenn reveals that he used his magic nullification spell called the Fool's Arcana to nullify the curse's effects when he got close enough to the Queen, and that's how she lived. The Queen apologizes to Rumia for those harsh words and reconciles with her. On the other side, Albert and Requisel find Elena and arrest her on charges of orchestrating the Queen and her daughter's demise. Albert asks why the heretic mages of the researchers of the Divine Kingdom are going after Rumia, so she gives them the clue, Akashic Records, before making her escape. They come back to Glenn to let him know about the researchers of the Divine Kingdom and tell him to be careful from now on before taking their leave. The Queen takes her leave too and tells Glenn and Celica to look after Rumia. Later, Rumia asks Glenn how he knew that her mom was lying, so Glenn begins to tell her the big backstory. When Rumia was abducted 3 years ago, the Queen begged Glenn to save her, saying Rumia was everything to her. Rumia realizes that Glenn is the Mage of Justice and thanks him for looking after her for all these years. They return to the place where Class 2 is celebrating and get harassed by drunk Sistine. It's dawn, and in the woods, Sistine and Glenn are acting very suspenseful, but actually they're just training hand-to-hand combat. Sistine thought that she would get special training from Glenn, like learning new spells or boosting her magical powers, so she is a bit disappointed. Glenn explains that if she trains his way, she will hone her senses when it comes to actual duels, and that he will teach her military-grade magic as well, so that she can protect her friends. He adds that there's a dark side to military magic, but he is sure that she will get over it soon enough. Later in the morning, Sistine and Rumia find Glenn waiting for them on the way to school. Rumia realizes that he is worried about her, as she is now the main target of the researchers of the Divine Kingdom, so she tells him to rest easy. Requiselle comes out of nowhere in the Magic Academy dress and attacks Glenn. This disclaimer, no one knew what Requiselle's gender was in the previous episodes. That's why the writers put her in a school dress. Anyway, seeing Requiselle in the uniform, Glenn realizes that she's the new transfer student that the Imperial government assigned to be the bodyguard of Rumia. Requiselle clears up the misunderstanding and tells everyone that she is actually here to protect Glenn. She explains that she doesn't want to protect her and would rather protect Glenn, so Glenn tightens her loose screws and makes her understand that she has to protect Rumia. Glenn then takes her to the class and introduces her to the students, but she behaves dully just as Glenn did on his first day as a teacher here. So Glenn slowly whispers to her what to say to her new classmates, but even after that effort, she gets labeled a weirdo. A student assumes that Glenn and Requiselle are already acquainted, so he asks about their relationship. In reply, Requiselle says that Glenn is her everything and that she has devoted her life just to him. Her bold answer, although it excites the girls, makes the boys and Sistine heartbroken. Later at the practice grounds, the students are gathered to test their Thundershock spell. Sistine feels so rejected from earlier that she vents out all of her anger on the training dummy. Requiselle's turn comes up, but she can't get herself to even aim at the dummy, so she uses a military-grade spell to destroy the training dummy and scares the bejesus out of her classmates. She was deemed a weirdo by the students before, but now she is labeled as dangerous as well. So the first day of Requiselle's student life is going pretty well. Rumia and Sistine still try to befriend Requiselle and take her to the cafeteria to eat lunch. Requiselle orders a pile of strawberry tarts and eats everything herself, but still, the girls try to get along and invite more classmates to join them, so Glenn finally gets relieved and goes to the library to meet with Celica. There, he discusses Requiselle and wonders if she would get more social on his class's upcoming field trip. The field trip begins soon after, and Glenn promises to take the boys to the beach of Scenaria Island so that they can see all the girls in their bikinis. At the port, Glenn notices that Albert is in the disguise of a creepy old man, so he realizes that Albert is actually the person who is in charge of protecting Rumia and Requiselle is just a decoy. Albert comes out of his disguise and warns Glenn to stay wary of Requiselle because of something that happened in the past, and then Albert goes to hide again. After reaching the island, Glenn gets seasick and still waits eagerly to see the girls in their bathing suits. Yeah, but Rumia realizes that Glenn is not a perv and only brought everyone here so that he could teach them military-grade magic. The girls change their clothes, go for a swim, and give the boys a show worth watching. Sistine invites Glenn and the boys to play volleyball, so they give it their all and have fun till nightfall. Later at night, the boys think of a plan to sneak into the hotel and peep on the girls. Glenn doesn't like the plan and gives them a better strategy, but then he remembers that he is actually their teacher, so he tells the boys to go back to their rooms as this is clearly against the rules. The boys explain that they have their needs, so they retaliate and start an all-out war against Glenn. Requiselle sees how much fun Glenn is having and tells Sistine that he was always gloomy before. Glenn defeats all of the boys and goes to the beach to have peaceful times. Sistine and Rumia take Requiselle to show her the view and play with each other to have more fun. Requiselle finally enjoys being with them, and seeing her laugh, Glenn wonders why Albert warned him about her. At midnight, Requiselle approaches Glenn and asks why he left the Imperial Mage Corps. She tells him that without him, she would have nothing to live for. Glenn tells her to live and enjoy her own life, as that is what her late brother would also want. But Requiselle doesn't understand anything that Glenn is saying and asks him what's so wrong if he stays by her side. She tells him that she hates Sistine and Rumia for stealing Glenn from her and runs away from him while crying. On the other side, the researchers of the Divine Kingdom are scheming a devious plot once again. It's a new morning and it's time for the students to go on a mountain hike to an an infamous white alchemy research lab, everyone, including Sistine and Rumia, gets very tired. Sistine tries to talk with Requiselle, but she doesn't talk to them. She repeatedly tells the two girls to shut up and screams at them, saying she hates them both. Glenn tells Sistine not to get upset, as Requiselle sometimes acts in a similar way when she is unstable, and explains that he is the reason why she is so pissed off. The class finally reaches the White Alchemy Research Lab and is welcomed by the director, Burks. On their way inside, Burks explains that white alchemy is a field that combines alchemy with white magic. The alchemists here examine nothing less than life itself, and that's why it's necessary for Burks to find a place filled with fresh mana. When saying that, Burks gives Rumia a look, so she gets a bit suspicious. The students enter a room where the alchemist combines multiple plants and animals to create chimeras. Rumia doesn't like the fact that people are manipulating life itself, and to her it seems wrong. Sistine explains that this research lab doesn't actually do something like that, and mentions that there was a time when the alchemists tried to find a way to bring the dead back to life, using a project called Revive Life. An alchemist approaches them and tells Sistine that although she is right, the alchemists later found out that there was no existing magic that could resurrect the dead. Glenn explains that the alchemists figured that they needed 3 crucial ingredients to bring back the dead: a new body created using the same genes, an astral code that can transform memories into data, and alter ether, which resets a person's soul. And combining that with that, the alchemists thought that they could create a perfect duplicate of the deceased. Glenn mentions that multiple people needed to be sacrificed in order to revive one person, and that kind of trade-off wasn't sustainable, so the project was abandoned. But the alchemist with them tells them that he has heard of rumors of the researchers of the Divine Kingdom successfully reviving people after stealing Project Revive Life's data. Glenn thinks that this is just speculation and moves on from it. Sistine asks out of curiosity if there's anything else that is needed to revive a person aside from the 3 elements that Glenn mentioned earlier, so the alchemist explains that there is someone with original magic, but finding that person is impossible. In the evening, Rumia sees Requiselle alone, so Glenn tells her to get it over with. But Requiselle has started to hate Sistine and Rumia so much that she behaves badly again and runs straight to the beach. Glenn tells Sistine and Rumia that Requiselle is mentally a little child because that's just the way she was born, and he hopes that they didn't lose their patience with her. Sistine understands that Requiselle needs friends and decides to go look for her, but Glenn tells her to stay and goes himself, as he is the teacher. Meanwhile, an evil mage disguised as Requiselle's late brother comes in front of her to manipulate her. Albert realizes that the researchers of the Divine Kingdom are behind this, but before he can save her, Elena stops him with her magic and promises him one hell of a time. Albert wants to kill Elena immediately and ends up getting involved in a big fire blast released by Elena. She then summons dozens of undead to attack Albert, so Albert uses his lightning spell to burn them all. Albert sees that she is burning, but her wounds are healing instantly, so he realizes that she is on a whole different level than any of the mages he has fought before. He deems her too dangerous to be left alive, so he prepares for the finishing spell. Meanwhile, Sistine wonders what happened to Requiselle all of a sudden, since she was fine before confronting Glenn. She doesn't give it much thought and goes out to purchase some food. Requiselle's counterfeit brother tells her that even though he was executed by the organization, he claims that he was still breathing. He reveals that Requiselle earned her freedom 2 years ago from them by becoming defective, but he remains their slave still. So he tells her that if she can bring Rumia to the organization, he will become free like her. Glenn arrives there to rescue Requiselle from the fake evil mage, but Requiselle thinks that her brother is real, and so she betrays Glenn, stabbing him with her great sword. While battling Elena, Albert sees Glenn on the ground and realizes that Elena's true goal was to lure him away from the beginning. As her objective is now fulfilled, she escapes from the scene. Sistine comes to Rumia's room to see that she has been stabbed unconscious by Requiselle. Requiselle tells Sistine that she has already killed Glenn, which breaks her completely. Still, she stands up again to save Rumia, but she doesn't have enough courage to shoot someone. Sistine remembers how weak she was all her life and gets frozen by pressure, so Requiselle uses this opportunity to flee with Rumia. Albert comes to the room carrying Glenn and tells Sistine that he doesn't have much more time left. Sistine begins to cry, so Albert tells her a way to save Glenn, the white magic ritual Reviver. But that requires a lot of mana, so both Albert and Sistine will need to give their entire mana to him. Albert begins begins to write the magic circle while Sistine hesitantly gives Glenn CPR. Rumia wakes up in a secret lair of the researchers of the Divine Kingdom hanging on the ceiling. Rumia asks Requiselle why she betrayed her and Glenn. Requiselle explains that she had no other choice but to dedicate herself to her brother in this cause, because she doesn't have any other reason for living. Glenn remembers when he found Requiselle half dead in the blizzard and apologized to her for arriving late. He regains consciousness and thanks Albert for saving him, but Albert gives all credit to the sleeping Sistine, as she did the most by giving all of her mana. Albert wants to use Sistine to rescue Rumia, but Glenn opposes it because he thinks of her as a child. Rather, he asks what they are up against. Albert explains everything to Glenn and tells him that he had already predicted the researchers of the Divine Kingdom showing up here. Albert didn't tell Glenn about all this, as he was planning to use Rumia as bait from the beginning, but his plan backfired. Albert corrects himself, saying he was only following orders and blames the superiors for coming up with this plan. On top of that, he blames Requiselle for being a naive little brat and decides to eliminate her if she stands in their way any longer. But Glenn doesn't want to harm Requiselle and wants to clear up her confusion. Albert gets mad at Glenn as he wants to play a hero after running away and abandoning his companions. Glenn knows that he has messed up, but wants to make up for his mistakes. So Albert finally agrees with Glenn and gives him a gun in case of an emergency. Back at the lair, Rumia is being experimented on with dark magic. The Chemist Research Lab's director, Burks, reveals himself to be a member of the researchers of the Divine Kingdom and tells of his plan to use Rumia to succeed in his project Revive Life. Burks thanks Requiselle's fake brother for gathering all three enemies and for persuading Requiselle to join him and bring the amplifier Rumia. Burks tells Rumia that the researchers of the Divine Kingdom are not evil, rather he thinks that the Imperial family is evil and corrupt. Elena tells Burks to stop teasing Rumia, so he proceeds to the main part of the machine and tortures Rumia for Project Revive Life. Polina realizes that she is being tracked by a magic signal from Albert, but it's too late as Albert and Glenn have already arrived. Glenn thinks that there is no security, but he jinxes it and a mana beast appears out of nowhere. Albert easily defeats the beasts using fire magic, so they keep moving towards Rumia. Meanwhile, Sistine wakes up and tells her classmates about the situation. Glenn and Albert face another mighty beast, and Glenn uses the extinction ray to kill the beast. Burks gets upset seeing his beasts fall one after another and promises to make Glenn take his last breath. Elena, being the evil witch she is, puts a conditional curse on Burks because of the promise he just made. She then takes her leave, as she knows that Albert and Glenn will eventually reach here and defeat Burks. The students of Class 2 argue over what they should do after hearing about the situation from Sistine and decide to go find and help Glenn rescue Rumia. Burks approaches Glenn and transforms into a nasty monster. Albert fights Burks as a distraction, and Glenn heads towards Rumia's location. The class nerd, Jibble, tells the class that they shouldn't interfere, as they will just become liabilities, and wants to trust Glenn on this one. Sistine agrees with Jibble, tells everyone that waiting here is the best, and begs them to believe in Glenn. The project Revive Life is almost complete, but Glenn comes there to put this evil plot to an end. Requiselle comes up front to protect her brother and summons her sword to protect him. Glenn tells her that the man behind him is not her brother, but Requiselle doesn't want to listen to any reasoning. She keeps slashing her sword towards Glenn and corners him, so Glenn brings out his gun to fend off Requiselle. Glenn then asks Requiselle what her brother's name is, but Requiselle can't remember and starts to have a headache, so Glenn uses this opportunity to restrain her and goes to attack the fake brother. Requiselle finally remembers that her brother's name was Seon and realizes that she is a clone of a person named Alessia, made by Seon and his comrade Rainer using Project Revive Life, hence giving her the name Ri, as she is a clone and Alushi is ill. While still in the process of making Requiselle, one day Seon decided to put an end to this, as there were too many sacrifices made to make only one clone. But Rainer didn't prefer that and slew both Seon and Alicia. The phony sibling tells Glenn that Seon deceived him by informing the Imperial Court Mage Corps about Revive Life, but Glenn already understands that, as he was the one Seon reached out to. But when Glenn arrived at the lab, he discovered everyone except Rainer deceased and Requiselle inside the vat. The fake sibling reveals himself to be Rainer, tells Glenn that Requiselle is merely an incomplete creation, and displays his 3 fresh flawless creations. He unleashes his trio trio of new puppets to assault Requiselle, but Glenn rescues her. Requiselle, realizing that she is an imitation, refuses to be safeguarded and would prefer death for mistreating everyone horribly, so Glenn delivers a rousing monologue and Requiselle rises and eliminates the trio of puppets. Glenn then knocks unconscious the fake sibling, while Albert incinerates Burks thoroughly. Rumia is at last rescued and returns to Sistine, and they ultimately get along and savor the remainder of their excursion. Although Glenn can rest easy, knowing he halted Revive Life, Elena possesses all data required to relaunch it again. Glenn and Albert admire the view of the girls playing in their bathing suits. Albert notes that Sistine resembles their previous associate Sarah Silvers. At another hidden lair of the researchers of the Divine Kingdom, Elena reports to the Grand Master of the researchers of the Divine Kingdom. The Grand Master learns via Elena that Rumia's latent abilities have developed. He still desires to wait and monitor. However, Elena informs him that there are individuals within the researchers of the Divine Kingdom plotting to cause Rumia's resurgence, so she requests authorization to interfere. The Grand Master grants her authority to handle them however she prefers, and tells her that the decisions the members of the researchers of the Divine Kingdom will choose will be the bricks that will construct his chronicle. Sistine and Rumia take Requiselle to their residence. Sistine's guardians attempt their hardest to charm Requiselle, but their outdated comedy causes discomfort. Sistine's mom asks Requiselle if she admires anyone, and Requiselle replies that she has once again pledged her whole existence to Glenn. Sistine's folks wish to travel to the capital the following morning, so they assign the three girls the duty to guard the house. Sistine's dad forgets a thing that he needs to mention. It must be irrelevant because side characters. Later that evening, the trio of girls admire the scenery and gaze at the aerial citadel in the horizon. Requiselle once more attempts to apologize, but Sistine and Rumia reassure her that she doesn't have to and give her a large embrace. The following school day, Professor Celica spots that Sistine is intrigued by Nogalius' Sky Citadel and recalls that her deceased grandfather, a famed scholar, dedicated decades researching the Sky Citadel too. Sistine aspires to fulfill her late grandfather's intentions, but she's uncertain if she will succeed. Celica advises her to press onward, saying she will attain her aspirations someday, and she wishes her well. Celica then descends to a hidden vault to access a subterranean labyrinth. Glenn encounters Sistine at the archive and chooses to spend time with her. He brings up the fact that Sistine literally kissed him while administering CPR, which causes Sistine to blush immensely until her face reddens. Riel sees that and summons her blade, believing Glenn has saddened her, and proceeds to demolish the entire academy. Glenn nearly collides with a carriage, and the person inside, named Leos Klados, saves him by wielding his wind sorcery. Leos introduces himself to Glenn and Sistine, asserting that he will serve as a visiting instructor at the academy from this point forward, and adds that he is Sistine's betrothed. Sistine's dad finally recalls that he was supposed to notify Sistine that her fiancé is arriving. See, no help, side characters. Anyway, Sistine gets overwhelmed as she never consented to a betrothal with Leos, so he reminds her that they vowed to wed when they were kids. Glenn interrupts the talk and advises Leos not to marry her, as she can be quite grumpy, but Leos becomes rather insulted and asks him to cease belittling his future bride. Sistine interrupts the quarrel between her two admirers and explains to Leos that Glenn is the educator here and is merely jesting. Leos recognizes the name and tells him that he is actually becoming well known everywhere for his unorthodox teaching approach, but Glenn doesn't consider himself notable. The headmaster and Hallie realize that Leos is one of the finest mentors on the continent, but that is fairly troubling for Celica, as this might be another trap by the researchers of the Divine Kingdom. Meanwhile, Leos tells Sistine how deeply he cherishes her, so Glenn understands there is room for all the moody Karens in the world and continues cracking jokes, but his humor gets improperly reprimanded by Sistine. The guest mentor's seminar, Leos, soon commences, and his excellent discipline dazzles all the pupils, who applaud him. Glenn also attends the lecture from the back seat. He sees how pitch perfect Leo's lecture was, and how easily he explained a military-grade technique, but he shouldn't be teaching these lessons, as the students have not matured yet, according to Glenn. If the students learn to harness huge power without being aware of what power means, they won't understand what it represents. Rumia also realizes that Glenn isn't approving of Leo's lesson, and tells him that she thinks Glenn's lessons are far better, as he tries his best to make the students grow wiser too. Leos comes up the stairs to hear Sistine's candid opinion of his lecture. Sistine says it's quite fabulous, so Leos thinks that he has cleared the first hurdle on his path to becoming the perfect husband. He asks Sistine to go for a walk and takes her away to discuss private matters. They walk side by side and remember their childhood days of always being together. While the two are talking about their personal matters, Glenn, Rumia, and Rael spy on them like creeps. Leo suddenly proposes to Sistine to marry her, so Glenn gets excited that her favorite student is getting married. But the drama takes a sudden twist as Sistine rejects his proposal because she wants to learn magic to accomplish her grandfather's dreams. But Leo calls her ambitions ridiculous and tells her that she will be wasting her life. Glenn can't take any more of his discouraging words and comes out of the bush. He tells Sistine not to listen to Leos, as she is the main character of her life and can make her own decisions. Leos tells Glenn that it's none of his business, and Glenn knows it too, but Sistine tells Leos that it is Glenn's business, as they are madly in love with each other and secretly engaged. Glenn realizes that she is lying to save herself from Leos, so he joins in on the act too and tells Leos that she fell in love and fell hard, and in fact she fell on his bed last night. His exaggeration gets him blasted away again, but that was enough to make Leos a rival of Glenn. Glenn decides to end this rivalry right here, right now, by going against each other in a duel. But Leos has class now, and she agrees to have a duel sometime later. Glenn really enjoys being a fake fiance and realizes that if he actually marries Sistine, he won't have to work anymore, since she will shower him with money. Stop it, get some help. He gets so determined to marry Sistine that he shares the gist with his class about his and Sistine's future and tells them that he will train them to win the duel. But the students get confused, so Glenn explains that Leos hasn't agreed on the nature of the duel and could duel based on his teaching skills. As he is a prodigy instructor, the class still doesn't agree to train for no reason, so Glenn tells them that they will get their shares of his money too, once he gets filthy rich by marrying Sistine. Later at a bar, Glenn tells everything to Albert and gets mocked for competing over a woman he doesn't even love. Glenn still jokes around about it and moves on to ask Albert why he has called him here. Albert reveals that he has received word that Angel's dust has been smuggled into the city. Apparently, it's an extinct drug that turns people into husks, mindless puppets to control. So Glenn wants to find the perpetrator, but Albert tells him not to get involved as this is official work. Albert reveals that their late comrade Sarah gave her life to destroy this drug's production once and for all. But now that it's back, Al thinks that Sarah died for nothing. Glenn wants to save people this time, so Albert realizes that Glenn sees Sarah's resemblance in Sistine. Their discussion ends, and Glenn leaves the bar. He remembers his and Sarah's times together. Sarah always encouraged Glenn to keep on with his dreams of becoming a mage of justice, and was a great friend. Meanwhile, Leos reports back to a mysterious man and tells him that Glenn acted the way he predicted. The mystery man then tells Leos to put on a great show with Glenn to lay the foundation for his next scheme. Leos finally comes up with the terms of their duel and makes Hallie the referee. Hallie explains that this will be a mage corps battle, and in this battle, one class will face the other in a mock battle. Both classes' professors will be their commanders, and they will be obeying their orders. Hallie adds that every spell in this mock battle will be similar to military-grade magic, so he tells the weak to leave the battlefield at once. Winning this battle will depend on how the commanders deploy their forces and use tactics. When combat begins, both teams have 3 hours to fight, and if one team can capture the enemy base, they win. He adds that if a commander gets defeated, the other team also wins. Leos comes to Sistine saying that he will win this and also win her heart. That makes Glenn furious, as he wants her heart so that he can get the money. Sistine reveals that she is marrying nobody and wants to continue learning, but then she imagines the scenario of her and Glenn actually marrying each other, and that makes her blush again. A few moments later, with both teams ready, the battle between classes 2 and 4 commences. Two students from class 2 use the high ground to gain an advantage, but class 4's overwhelming power knocks them out of the battle. Class 4 excels in every way with their extreme magical power and begins to move onward to capture the enemy base. A flashback shows Leo's teaching class to the 3-man cell tactic, which is the most successful strategy to win in modern mage combat, but Glenn doesn't like the idea, as this strategy would easily falter if there was no teamwork. So Leos wonders if Glenn is using the tech tactic that he taught class 2, but he knows that Glenn can't handle such a complicated strategy, so he overconfidently deploys more troops to destroy Glenn's amateur troops. The other professors of the Magic Academy have also joined as spectators, and they too think that Leos will become the winner, but Glenn shows them that a book shouldn't be judged by its cover and uses combined forces to stop Leo's troops from coming any further. Another flashback shows Glenn teaching his students how to use teamwork for their secret strategy. Glenn is actually using a two-man cell and combining two different elements to increase the firepower. Real Axe is a one-man army and takes on a squad on her own. Leos thinks that he has figured out Glenn's strategy, but he gets juked again as Glenn himself takes on dozens of students from class 4. Healer is the students into the woods and traps them using petty dirty tricks. Glenn laughs like a crazy maniac and tells his students to counterattack with everything they have, but the time limit soon ends, so Hallie calls the duel a draw. Even though it's a draw, Glenn commends class 2 for almost defeating a nutjob military grave leader. Meanwhile, Leos bashes class 4 for not following his orders and makes them feel low, so Glenn tells him to stop being a jerk, but that just insinuates Leos even more. So he challenges Glenn again in a one-on-one duel, but Sistine can't take it anymore being treated like an object constantly, but Glenn doesn't want to hear from her, so she slaps him and runs away. Later, Rumia tells Sistine that Glenn was only joking around and knows that he only wants to see Sistine's bright future. Rumia tells Sistine to talk this through with Glenn, and even she wants to tell Glenn about the creepy feeling she gets when she is around Leos. It's the same feeling she had when she was around Burks. Albert and his team find a dead body in an alleyway, clearly drugged by angel dust. Albert reveals that this is the 5th death case, so they must find a way to stop it from spreading. Leos returns on a carriage with the mystery man, and both hate Glenn together, but Leos moves on from the 3rd grade mage as he thinks that after tomorrow, he will marry Sistine and take over her family branch, which he finds detestable. Glenn thinks about the duel he has against Leo tomorrow. Sistine approaches him and asks for the reason why he is going up against Leos, so Glenn finally gets serious and tells her when he was a foolish young man studying hard to become the Mage of Justice, and one day became a mage in the Imperial Army. However, Glenn was still young and arrogant, and before he could know what he was doing, too much blood was in his hands, so he began to hate magic for sending him down the wrong path, but he still didn't lose hope of becoming the Mage of Justice because he had his friend Sarah who supported his dream. But on one mission, Glenn failed and let Sarah die. Her death made him as disenchanted as ever, so he gave up being a mage and became a shutout. That's why Glenn wants Sistine to still have her ambitions and solve the mystery of the Sky Castle, so that he can atone for losing Sarah by protecting her dream because she reminds him of Sarah. And when Leos wanted to snatch Sistine's dreams away, Glenn couldn't just stand by. Hence the duel. Sistine gets happy hearing that she has someone who will support her dreams and promises to work harder from now on. Leos finds his way there too, bringing up Glenn's past and insulting him for being a ruthless murderer. Glenn gets provoked and goes into hand-to-hand combat, but he has actually fallen for a trap, and Glenn uses his trance magic to summon Tulpas to defeat him ruthlessly. Leos finally shows Sistine his true colors and threatens to marry her. The next morning is supposed to be Glenn and Leo's duel, but Glenn never shows up. Leos begins to abuse Sistine, so she hopelessly seeks Glenn's help, but since he disappears, Sistine accepts Leo's proposal. Their marriage is about to happen next week, and her friends don't interfere. A flashback shows Rumia telling Glenn about Sistine's odd behavior before the duel. Glenn assures her that he will fix everything, but he has disappeared since then. Still, Rumia has faith in Glenn and asks Requisel to have faith in him too. A week passes, and the marriage ceremony is about to begin, so Sistine walks down the aisle as the bride and reads their vows, but when they are about to kiss, Glenn finally interferes and uses a smokescreen to retrieve Sistine. Glenn apologizes for being away and explains that he looked for ways to defeat Leos and came up with a plan to beat Leos. Sistine tells Glenn that Leos doesn't have a goal and uses her for ulterior motives. Their path gets suddenly blocked by husks controlled by angel dust, and support comes from Albert's team for the students. Glenn tells Sistine to run, but she undermines the husk, so he makes the path using his new tricks and runs with Sistine. Glenn remembers that similar events happened when Sarah died, so he wonders if Leos is trying to do that. He realizes who the perpetrator is, so he strongly desires to protect her, but Sistine gets afraid seeing Glenn kill everyone who is already dead. Leos finds Glenn and commends him for defeating the husks. Glenn reveals that this guy is not Leos and is a former executioner of the Court Mage Corps, Jadis. Jadis. So Jadis comes out of his disguise and reveals that he killed Leo's videos using angel dust right after the battle between classes 2 and 4. After Sistine runs away, Glenn asks Jadis if he did all of that, including sending Leos here to only orchestrate a fight against Glenn. Jadis confirms it and reveals that his true goal is to exact justice, but Glenn knows that he is just using justice as an excuse so he can go around murdering all the powerful mages of the army and important figures of the Empire. Jadis again agrees to what Glenn said and reveals that he plans to obtain the Akashic Records. Apparently it contains the power to rule over the very principles of this world and wants it all for himself, but since its power can only be held by someone who is absolutely just badass, Jadis wants to be Glenn, whom he got defeated by 2 years ago. Jadis wants to be the Mage of Justice, so he uses the same magic that he used when he was disguised as Leos. But this time, Glenn finds a way to destroy the magical puppets. Meanwhile, Sistine realizes that she is a fool for pushing Glenn away and wonders what she should do. Glenn uses Iceman magic against Jadis, but he blocks it using fire magic. Jadis is clearly stronger than Glenn and gets the upper hand by using his magic puppets again, but Sistine saves Glennon, tells him that she wants to protect him too. Jadis doesn't enjoy the drama, so he prepares to summon his puppets again. Sistine and Glenn prepare to fight together as well, and with their powers combined, they completely destroy the puppets. Sistine then boosts Glenn's speed, and he doesn't miss the punch. But the fight is just the beginning, and Jadis prepares to summon a magical creature so big that it shouldn't be defeatable. But with Sistine's help, Glenn finally reaches Jadis in time and defeats him. But then he notices that Sistine has fainted, so Jadis uses this opportunity to escape and promises to take Glenn on a challenge again. Glenn carries Sistine back to the students as they cheer him on his win. Later at the bar, Glenn apologizes to Albert for letting Jadis go, but Albert isn't mad at him as he wasn't supposed to get involved in this case anyway. They both know that Jadis is a psycho, but this time there's something new, and that is the Akashic Records. The next morning, Glenn returns to work and makes fun of Hallie on the way. Celica reveals that she will be heading out on a full exploration of the underground labyrinth and tells Glenn that she will be counting on him. Glenn returns to his class, rises up again, and dreams of becoming the Mage of Justice again. To all Leaf Village ninjas, that is it for today. Recap: do not forget to join our clan, our army, my friend. You can do that by clicking that red button below the video. Destroy it for me with that bell. To follow us on YouTube with many videos to come in the following days. So see you later, bro. Peace out.